Hello, dear colleagues. Happy Open Access Week. So it's been a while since our last meeting online. So we are here today to celebrate Open Access Week with an AMICAL community. We also open this event to our library colleagues from Oslo Network. So, and today we're here to discuss, recent trends and changes that are happening in scholarly publishing with regards to open access. So this meeting is organized by the Open Scholarship Interest Group. So Cara Jones from American University in Sharjah and myself are co-organizers of the event. And we are very happy to introduce our speaker, Colleen Campbell, who many of you probably know. So she's been she met a lot of AMICAL colleagues in the past, and so Colleen will share her experience today, as she's one of the well-established experts in open access. So Colleen Campbell is a strategic advisor for external engagement at the Max Planck Digital Library, which, as we know, is one of the largest research institutions in Europe. Colleen coordinates the famous Open Access 2020 initiative, which is a global alliance of research organizations and their libraries that are working to repurpose their investments in subscriptions to support open access publishing. Colleen also serves on the management board of IFL Consortium, which is a non-profit organization that works with libraries to enable access to knowledge in developing and transition economy countries. So, and besides this, she also serves on the various committees and advisory groups of a variety of international initiatives related to scholarly publishing and open access. So thank you very much, Colleen, for joining us today. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here with you to celebrate Open Access Week. Thank you for inviting me. I hope that this will be a conversation, so I will rely on Cara and Gildis and the others to interrupt me if anyone wants to ask a question about any of the slides that I present, or if we want to stop and dig in deeper to any of the notions that I talk about. I've got about 20 slides, and really we're just going to take a look at scholarly publishing in transition. Now, I know that AMICAL institutions are rather unique. I come from the Max Planck Society. We are not a degree conferring institution. We produce primary research. So our context is a little bit different, but the framing, I think, of my talk today is really focusing on scholarly publishing, the largest proportion, and here we're focusing on, therefore, scientific journals, academic journals, and the bulk of scholarly journals, which are in the hands of a relatively small group of commercial publishers. That doesn't mean that publishing in social sciences and the humanities and in monographs is not important. We happen to focus on open access with the bulk of scientific journals, because that is such a large proportion of publishing and also of our investments in publishing. So by focusing on the open access transition in those journals is a strategy of high impact that we hope will then have positive impacts for other forms of scholarly publishing and other areas of scholarly communication involving other disciplines beyond STEM. So just to frame that, why I'm focusing on this particular area of scholarly publishing. A little bit about the Max Planck Society, my institution. The basic logic or philosophy behind the Max Planck Society and their commitment to open access is that scholarly communication is actually part of the research process. Meaning, if authors, if scientists go to academic conferences to discuss their works, their research, scholarly publishing is essentially the same thing. And so if institutions support their scholars in going to those conferences, we should support our authors in publishing by the same token. And so this is really the philosophy that we have. My own library, our strategy is to understand where our researchers publish and provide them with the means and the opportunity to publish openly. That means we cover book processing charges, we negotiate agreements with fully open access publishers to cover the costs of publishing, and we also negotiate transformative agreements so that in subscription-based journals, they will have the opportunity to publish openly, and we cover any fees related to publishing. Because the Max Planck Society is so committed to this notion, they initiated OA 2020, which is the initiative that I coordinate, and it's basically OA 2020 is about aligning research organizations around the world, universities and other research entities, to form sort of a coalition to address these global publishers in an aligned way, right? To sort of address publishers as on eye level, because too often publishers negotiate agreements with individual institutions or even with authors, not even negotiating there. They just charge authors APCs, and individual authors cannot negotiate with huge global publishers. So we need a global alliance to do that. Yeah, so that's kind of where the Max Planck Society is coming from. Now, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the history of scholarly communication or scholarly publishing, still thinking about that large chunk of publishing related especially to science. Really, open access began with the advent of the internet, and that was adopted in our own institutions. I don't know how familiar you are, maybe you know a lot of this already, but I'll go ahead and just give us a view. We started in the 1990s, early 90s, with the launch of Archive, the preprint server, which was an academy-led initiative where scientists, recognizing the opportunity for broad dissemination that the internet provided, began to communicate their research by posting preprints of their articles. Now, after that, the first online-only journals began to pop up. If you have been around in the library business, the library sector for as long as I have, perhaps you remember when we moved from print to online and even online only after that. So open access really started with the advent of journals going online. Then also in the early 90s, we saw the first journals adopting open peer review. Again, trying to use the internet to get greater transparency and facilitate scholarly communication in the truest sense of the word, openly and easily. So open peer review, posting an author's, the reviewer's name with the article, their review reports with the article, really innovating around scholarly communication. Then, of course, around 2000, we had, that's a big jump, quite some time later, publishing community woke up and said, aha, we can actually create fully open access journals. And Biomed Central then was founded. This was or is a commercial publishing initiative. And then, hang on, I'm not seeing my slides here. I want to move my my bar around just a second to minimize bar. Okay, right. Then, sorry. Around 2002, 2003 is when the academic community fully recognized, aha, we need to promote open access as the form of scholarly communication. And so these initiatives called for the global research community to collaborate together on making scholarly communication fully open. Then we also had, sorry, I'm looking to minimize this because it's disrupting my view of the slides. I mean, the launch of PLOS, you see that PLOS Biology. Then a little bit later, we had the launch of PLOS One, the first mega journal, and we're starting to see the birth of hybrid publishing. Because in the meantime, as you know, over this decade of work, subscription publishing continued to be the main mode of publishing subscription journals, so journals behind the paywall, and yet this demand for open access, and you'll see here in gray, the open access policies adopted by different funders or different institutions were cropping up. So authors were required to publish, were beginning to be required to publish or disseminate some form of their article, either their accepted manuscript or the published article openly, open access. But because most journals were still working on a subscription model, publishers created this hybrid model, allowing authors to publish their individual articles open access in subscription journals for an added fee. What happened next? Excuse me. There, I'm in a little trouble with Zoom here. What happened next? Next, one of the key moments, I guess, in recent times is the 2012 Finch report, a report commissioned in the UK to analyze, okay, this open access, how do we enable open access to the results of research? This is something that is desired by the academic community, and how do we make it happen? And one of the findings of the report was ultimately viewed later as perhaps well, it had consequences, let's put it that way, and that is this reinforcing of hybrid open access publishing in the context of subscription journals. The hope was, if we have more and more hybrid publishing, eventually subscription-based journals would flip to open access. Now, that was in 2012. In the UK, then analyzing the effects of the Finch report, and we're looking at an example in the UK, but this is really replicated in countries around the world. What happened was, and you see in the graphs here, institutions continued to pay subscription fees for journals, but the hybrid open access publishing fees began to increase. So ultimately, what did it mean? That desired flip, more open access publishing happening in subscription journals, wasn't happening. What was happening, rather, was that libraries or institutions were ultimately spending more because they paid subscription fees, and on top, they paid, or authors or research funders paid hybrid open access publishing fees. And I'm just going to pause for just a second to see if there's a comment in the chat that I need to respond to.
There's one comment, Colleen, just asking about open peer review.
Yeah. So I'm looking at it. Okay, fantastic. Yes, open peer, great. Open peer review. Well, I do have a slide at the very end. Maybe we can come back to that. Okay, I'll just keep going. But yes, we will come back to open peer review. So we see that costs are increasing for everyone, which ultimately means that publishers are making more money through scholarly publishing. Essentially, after the Finch report, we really saw two parallel markets. We had a journal subscription market, which, as all of you know, we are negotiating subscription agreements with publishers, and because those agreements have non-disclosure clauses in them, we are unable to do any benchmarking around the pricing, really giving the publishers a lot of market power to set the pricing as they wish. No, and that leaves no ability for us, to have any conversations around, I mean, is this a reasonable price or not? And of course, we all know that pricing just continues to increase year on year. And in the meantime, we have a parallel open access publishing market on the same journals. So this duplicate revenue stream of hybrid publishing, as more and more authors choose to publish openly because they want to publish their research openly and garner the broadest readership possible, or because their institution or their grant funder requires them to publish openly. And individual authors, of course, don't really have any negotiation power to influence the pricing of APCs. And even their institutions have not had any oversight of that spending that authors are doing. So yeah, we have just really it's an incredible situation that really it's not present in any other sector in commerce anywhere. It's just an insane situation. So recognizing we have these two parallel streams, what happened? Institutions and their national consortia started to recognize this as a problem and said, we must do something about these parallel markets. We saw in 2014 the first offset agreements, really a negotiation at a national consortium level with a publisher saying, you're making extra money through open access publishing, but we are paying subscription fees. We need to offset those added costs of open access publishing. There was the launch of Scope 3, an international consortium who together negotiated, tried a new model of basically tendering open access publishing services in particle physics, high energy particle physics. So experimenting new ways to negotiate with publishers to rein in those costs, get more oversight. And then also a fundamental paper was published by my colleagues here at the Max Planck Digital Library, essentially proving that the money invested in subscriptions was actually enough to support open access publishing, to support those same journals in an open access publishing model, meaning that the hybrid article processing charges on top of subscriptions was not justified. There was no justification for asking for added costs. That put institutions in a position to begin a new level of negotiation with scholarly publishers. And that is what happened at the next 14th Berlin Open Access Conference that I'll talk about in just a second. And that coincided with the launch of Plan S, which you might understand is like an initiative of grant funders, primarily in Europe, but also some international grant funders who have really said, enough of this hybrid publishing on top of subscription spend. We want to accelerate the open access transition, but we don't want to endlessly spend money on hybrid. Now, in where we are today, and here looking from the perspective of institutions, the first movers who have adopt an approach of negotiating open access with the major scholarly publishers have been successful. And today they have been able to achieve 100% output, 100% open access for their outputs, thanks to the comprehensive strategies that they are putting in place. And I'll talk about them in just a moment. So what we can really see is we started back in the 90s and we're moving forward today, two decades on. But in recent years, there has been a lot of acceleration. And a lot of that is thanks to transformative agreements, which you might know, you might actually have some or be part of them. But we'll talk about that here now in just a second. So looking back over the past couple decades, from a different perspective, we're going to look now at scholarly publishing generally. And what you have here is a view of the number of articles published based on, I think it's dimensions data. You can see that the number of articles published in scholarly journals has nearly tripled in the past 2 decades. And that you can see open access as, you know, the predominant model is really taken over from as of 2018. So just to clarify here on the bottom in gray, those are articles published behind subscriptions, paywall, not available openly. Then you have the green, that means articles that are available openly, but only, in a repository. So an author's accepted manuscript. Then bronze is the next, which means the article is published openly on the publisher platform, but it is the publisher that holds the copyright. So the publisher could eventually close access again. Then we have the light yellow here, which is hybrid publishing. And then on top, fully open access journals. So really, as of 2022, around 45% of scholarly articles were published as paid for open access. And analysts see this growth and project even faster growth, midterm growth, around 14–15%, both in volume, in the number of articles published openly or published generally, and in the value, in the cost. So if I'm a librarian and I look at this trend of publishing and where it's going, you know, we really have to ask ourselves as libraries, what is our role in this shifting landscape where subscriptions, you know, it looks pretty steady over the years. There's been a steady, even small increase, so not that flip that we were hoping to see. And this enormous growth in open access publishing. Yeah, what does that mean for us in our role? I think it's an important question for us to be asking. We also see in the policy landscape a drive for not only open access, but open science. The UNESCO recommendations on open science published a couple of years ago, one of the key points that I think libraries should consider was the recommendation that investment policies and strategies should be based on the core values and principles of open science. Investment policies, and that regards not only the investments of grant funders, but investments of institutions and our libraries. Think about our budgets. Are they oriented around paywalls, or are they oriented around open access and open science? We can see more and more agencies, funding agencies, government bodies that are beginning to adopt policies around open access. The European Council recently emitted some council conclusions calling for transparent, equitable, open access to scholarly publications. So giving a little bit more strength behind this call for open access. In 2022, the United States White House Office of Science and Technology Policy issued guidance to all of their federal agencies to establish policies demanding public access, open access to the results of their research that is immediate, not after an embargo period. So with these policy statements policies becoming stronger, even the publishers themselves have started to plan to flip to fully open access models. Cambridge University Press has stated they aim to flip all of their journals to open access by 2025. Royal Society of Chemistry, same thing. So if we see publishers beginning to flip, really, the question becomes again, for libraries, what does this mean? Are we subscribing now to Cambridge journals? What will that mean for us if CUP flips to open access in 2 years? Are we ready for that? Do we have the processes, the workflows, the budget streams organized for a flip to open access? I mentioned transformative agreements earlier, and I just wanted to clarify what they are. They were proposed at the 14th Berlin Open Access Conference as a framework to really manage this transition that we're seeing, to sort of help institutions and publishers adapt to the open access transition. In a sense, they were libraries saying, or the research community saying to publishers, okay, we recognize the value that you bring to our authors, our researchers. They want to publish in your journals. We and our authors the research community wants open access. We will commit to partnering through this transition, but it no longer can be on a basis of paying subscription fees and paying open access publishing fees on top. We expect this transition to be cost neutral. And we actually expect for further adjustments to follow as markets transform. It doesn't mean we want to keep paying the same amount of money forever. So that was introduced at the end of 2018. And since that time, so really in the past 5 years, we have seen this notion of transformative agreements, which covers essentially reading access and open access publishing under the oversight of one institutional agreement or consortium level agreement. And they are now occurring with consortia and institutions all over the world. More than, I think, 80 countries, more than 70 publishers are engaging in this transition strategy. And they're really proving to be scalable. It is a mechanism that can be adopted in any context. And we are also learning from each other. The first movers I mentioned before are already achieving open access for all of their outputs thanks to a combination of strategies. Here in the donut graphs I'm showing you, in the top line, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Netherlands, UK, Ireland. These were some of our first movers to adopt transformative agreements with the publishers that they deal with. And the peach color, those are their article outputs of their country that are enabled open access thanks to their transformative agreement negotiations. Then the gold is fully open access publishing that was occurring already naturally or else through agreements with fully OA publishers. And you can see that they're approaching nearly 100% of their outputs. So a lot of it's scalable and it's a high impact strategy for achieving open access. At my own institution, the Max Planck Society, we began adopting this strategy already in 2015. And literally, we looked at where our authors publish. And with every renewal that came up, with those major publishers where most of our authors published, we said we don't want a subscription agreement, we want an open access agreement. And slowly we have really enabled our authors to publish almost all of their work openly. This slice of Elsevier, you might know that in Germany, There are the nationwide deal negotiations, and we've just reached an agreement with Elsevier, so that will also enable our authors to publish open access. And we also negotiate open access agreements with fully open access publishers. So we really want our authors to be supported anywhere they want to disseminate their work openly. Even at a country level in the Netherlands, one of the first adopters, through their negotiations, through their green open access policies, they have already achieved literally almost 100% of open access. So in a very short period of time. So this is a strategy that is feasible and scalable. But I mentioned before, this negotiating these agreements, it's not just about reorganizing, the payments. It's really a framework for institutions to begin organizing themselves for an open access future and for open science, because the agreements, because they are organized around publishing, they introduce new workflows. Instead of paying one lump sum at the start of the subscription year, you can begin to, you have to look at, okay, what am I paying for? I'm paying for articles to be published openly. And how do I do that? We need to be able to identify who are the eligible authors covered by my agreement. We need to verify, yes, an author who submitted an article to this journal is in fact one of my authors. We have to be able to trace that article. Yes, it was published, and therefore the institution need to cover the costs of that. And what if there were co-authors? Who is it that pays for open access publishing for that author? We need to determine, is the author from my institution the corresponding author, like the first author generally? All of these mechanisms are introducing new workflows at libraries, helping us to organize our staffing. And the key here is organizing the metadata that we need. The idea is, by setting up these processes, it's kind of like an opportunity for us to test them out, gain some good practice, share our experiences, so that, as we see, open access becomes more and more the standard in scholarly publishing. We will have the processes and the standards set up to be able to accommodate that on a really large scale. So this is really, these agreements are actually a learning opportunity for institutions to begin organizing themselves around open access and eventually open science. Now, of course, it's not easy for us all. These agreements can be challenging. One of the biggest challenges is cost distribution, because we are coming from the subscription world, as we know, where pricing was hidden. And as we begin to have agreements that are published openly, so we can see what a consortium or an institution has agreed, and we can look at that amount with respect to the number of articles published openly that agreement has enabled, and we can start beginning to do some calculations. And all of a sudden we see, oh my goodness, if that's what it costs for scholarly publishing in Germany, and that's what it costs for scholarly publishing in California, how do those two relate to each other? And what is the balance there? We can see then that perhaps some institutions were paying a very high level in subscriptions, and others might be paying a low level. And as we move to agreements based on publishing, though that shift, I mean, the investments might need to shift, because the service is not reading, the service is publishing. Many consortia around the world have a very important role to play in that context, because as institutions begin to organize their budgets around their publishing output, They can introduce internal cost distribution models that help institutions make that transition gradually. Participation, of course, is a challenge. In the subscription world, we might have, for example, big pharma might be, or industry might be subscribing. But if we move to an open access publishing world, these entities don't publish so much, and so the cost of open access publishing really falls to the academic sector. How can we think about integrating those investments? Or what about authors that are not affiliated with an institution? They might not have the funding available to cover open access publishing fees. How can we make sure that they are able to participate in scholarly publishing? And of course, all of this is very complex. I've just mentioned some things, and maybe I've raised more questions than answers in what I've said so far, because there are many different stakeholders involved. We have grant funders, institutional administration, and those who set research assessment policies. They are, a key actor in this space. Libraries, authors themselves, and we all need to strategize together in order to prepare for this open future. It's more cost efficient if we align our policies, our budget structures, and our strategies, to adapt to an open access and an open science world. There are complexities, but we also have opportunities. The first being transparency. Coming from a world where pricing is opaque, we are moving to a world, APCs, or the price charged for open access publishing is literally, it's displayed on every journal website. We can therefore look at the pricing and make considerations on that pricing. Is it fair? Is it equitable? Is it too high? Can we do some calculations and look at what is the publisher profit margin there? What can we do as a community, thanks to the transparency, to collectively put pressure on that pricing? It gives us an opportunity to have conversations around equity. That is one of the key principles, I think, on all of our minds right now. We know that the subscription system is not inclusive and it's not equitable. Now, through our negotiations around open access publishing, we have the potential to have conversations around equity with regard to the publishers. And alignment. I mentioned we have a complex landscape with many different actors. This is an opportunity for alignment as well. The library has a key role to play here because we have these long-standing relationships with publishers, and we have the negotiation experience. We can therefore work with our stakeholders and present to them, I could negotiate open access for you, alleviating the administrative burden for authors. Let's figure out how we can do this together. I know there's never enough money. We all know this, but what we need is more strategy. And so this is an opportunity for the library to promote strategic conversations in their institutions. 5 years after that Berlin Open Access Conference, where we first promoted transformative agreements, we are now, based on the experience that we have gained, we are now in a different place and can set our sights on even higher objectives. So right now, at the last conference held in June, this was a final statement that we issued to publishers who were there present at the meeting. We called in the CEOs of 5 very large publishers, and we had a panel discussion with them in which we communicated. We said we would be willing to partner with you on the transition, but this transition needs to happen faster. You might have seen, if you follow the literature, there are some countries, those first movers, for example, in Sweden, who have said, for the past 5 years, we've been doing transformative agreements. Our expectation is that is enough transition. Our expectation is the next time we negotiate, it must be an agreement, fully open access. So that's putting new pressure on publishers for that flip. We also, as a community, agreed that inequity is incompatible with scholarly publishing. And so we are working on thinking together, what are those measures that we could hold publishers accountable to for ensuring, or at least reducing inequities and fostering inclusion in scholarly publishing. Our negotiations are an opportunity to hold publishers accountable. Of course, academic self-governance is an imperative, meaning we want mechanisms to be able to see that just because I have an open access publishing agreement with a publisher, that should not influence the editorial processes of journals, right? We want to avoid any publisher lowering their standards of quality in their journals just to attract more articles and therefore more revenues. This is something that we all need to be vigilant of. And of course, author choice, author rights must be fully enabled. Any license to publish agreements that authors have to sign must always be in the spirit of open access. And I can, share more with you if you're interested about all of those notions. But just on very latest trends, after that statement, we have one of the taking the notion of equity and how can we inject more global equity in this scholarly publishing landscape. Coalition S has proposed a framework for considering equitable pricing. And here, by that, they are proposing, and this is just a proposal, of course, they've commissioned a framework and a tool that is now open for consultation. And it's really just a spreadsheet which has integrated a purchasing power index so that a publisher could say, all right, if this is what it costs me to publish, I will put that in the spreadsheet, and with this purchasing power index integrated into the framework, into the tool, it creates different pricing levels, like bands of pricing levels, so that potentially in in economic contexts where there is high economic power, they pay one price, and where there is low economic power, they pay another price that is proportionate. This is just a first attempt at thinking about how might pricing be differentiated in different parts of the world based on the local contexts. So at least we're having these conversations, right? Thanks to transformative agreements and this transparency that we're able to gain. And here we're back to the question of open peer review. All of this, this work in transformative agreements and this openness that we are creating is enabling us to have more conversations about other aspects of open, because we have the research, the university administration involved in the negotiations, because we have all of this open publishing happening. Now we are able to move deeper into other aspects. So open peer review, open science, preprints, open access monographs, working with our research communities also on a national level to expand to achieve that 100%, which means not just the major journals with the large commercial publishers, but also diamond open access, local publishing in original language, in our local languages. Getting this, this big, high impact strategy going has repercussions for the entire landscape as then we try to move toward open access. That's really kind of just a bit of a high level view of how my initiative and the institutions in active in OA 2020 sort of see what's happening in the landscape. So I will stop my screen share, and that way we can all sort of talk together about how you see things, and right, what any questions you might have or things you'd like to talk about together.
That's great. Thank you, Colleen. I'll give people a minute to put their thoughts together. And everyone, you're very welcome to put your raise your hand on your screen and ask a question, or pop a question in the chat. The question that we've had so far was on open peer review, which you've just covered, which was really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I know open peer review, it's a tricky one, right? Because sometimes authors don't, or scientists don't feel comfortable in publishing their name along with their review and their review report. This is, from my perspective, working within the library, peer review is something that belongs to scientists, right? That's part of the editorial process of journal publishing. And I mean, I would certainly like to promote that because it's an element of open science. And so I think that is the way to go. We understand that it's not easy though. And I think there's also some different perspectives based on the discipline, right? That's also, I think that a great opportunity that we have in this open access transition is, up until now, everything worked on a subscription model. But you had initiatives like Archive, where physicists and I think later chemists, they would post their preprints because that is, you know, they're completely comfortable sharing their preprints openly. And but other disciplines might not feel comfortable doing that. I really see, as we can move away from the subscription model, which is very monolithic, everybody, all of the disciplines operate on subscriptions. As we move away from that, we are creating opportunity for different disciplines to adopt the scholarly communication mechanisms that work best for their research. So I can imagine that Cell and Lancet, Science, these magazines might, or these journals might, you know, continue to exist as a proper journal for a long time because those authors really value them. But I can see in other disciplines the rise of preprint servers and overlay journals where peer review is done openly based on the preprint, and it's just sort of a continuous process. The key is to breaking up that monolith of subscriptions so that every discipline can innovate and find its own iteration of what scholarly publishing or scholarly communication should look like for them.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I don't see any questions coming in, so I'm going to ask another one. Most of the AMICAL institutions are very modest in size, and we don't have huge volumes of output, but do you have any advice for us when it comes to negotiating? Because it's very easy to do. Well, it's not very easy. It's easier to do at scale.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for us as a group, both as a group or a consortium of smaller institutions and as institutions on our own? Yeah,
I mean, I would say right now, one thought, I don't know if I could say advice here. I'm not going to give you advice. You all are the experts here. I'm just going to give you some thoughts, some thoughts that I've heard in conversations. One is, yes, where the first step is always to understand where your authors are publishing. So this is advice I would give everyone. And maybe as a consortium AMICAL, you can collaborate, sort of economies of scale. Is there someone among AMICAL, your institutions, can you put together a data analytics group and share this load and to help each other just get that basic knowledge? Where do our authors publish? Because it's not impossible. I can, the ESAC, I mentioned ESAC initiative and the different workflows. I can drop in the chat in just a moment how some of our institutions have gained knowledge around where authors are publishing. So that is the first step. So maybe you can even just get that as a basis. That will prepare you in any negotiation with a publisher, just help you to think about open access going forward. Another thought would be think about, once you have that understanding of the publishing, then how can you collaborate with each other within AMICAL? Are there areas where you could dedicate some time? So maybe it's not Elsevier or Springer Nature or Wiley, maybe it's not one of the big publishers. Maybe there's a small publisher where your authors all tend to go, or maybe there is a set of journals that you would want to collaborate with to support their subscribe to open, flip to open access. Maybe you want to collaborate on monographs, right? I think it's first trying to get an understanding of what publishing is happening, and then look for those commonalities and try to focus there. That would just be my initial thoughts. Also looking at what's happening in the publishing world. So if you see, let me see if you give me just a second, I want to show you one other thing. I'm going to show you a little bit. I didn't include this in the slides, but it's something really indicative in your own dealings. Like if you negotiate with a publisher, for example, Wiley, and you look at their portfolios, let me see if I can make this a little bigger. Sometimes this knowledge can help you in thinking about your negotiations if you do this. So this is the ESAC Market Watch, which is, again, it's an initiative that is coordinated by OE 2020. It's literally a library community of practice around open access publishing and implementing open access publishing within libraries. You'll see publishers here. What we're looking at is how publishers are doing in terms of the outputs in their journal portfolios. So Wiley, for example, we have back in 2016 or 2015, 2.4% of the articles they published were in fully OA journals, hybrid 2.9, transformative, no, they didn't have any transformative agreements back in the day, and 95% of their article output in their portfolio was behind a subscription paywall. Today, as of 2021, so it's not even the most recent, look at all that open access. So that means the subscription, one could potentially say that the subscription portfolio value of Wiley has decreased, right? I mean, this is kind of a negotiation discussion, of course, and Wiley is increasingly becoming, moving more and more open. The same thing with Springer, although you can see here as of 2021, their subscription journals were continuing to increase. So what I'm saying is, even if you are not prepared to negotiate a fully transformative agreement, you might even think about, well, what kind of subscription agreement am I being offered here? And knowing the trends that are happening, does it make sense to sign a 5-year subscription agreement when in fact the subscription content is actually getting lower and lower and content is becoming more and more open? I mean, these are just some questions that we might want to start thinking about.
Yes, thank you. That makes total sense to me. That's a really good piece of information to start with. So we've come to the end of the hour. We've got 5 minutes left. I don't see any more questions here. So I just wanted to say, on behalf of AMICAL and the Open Scholarship Group, thank you so much, Colleen, for your presentation today. It was so easy to understand what you were saying, and I really appreciate, I think you really targeted your audience well and gave us a really nice, gentle introduction, but then also moved on to some more sort of considered issues, which was perfect. Thank you. We have an open scholarship group with AMICAL, and if anybody here in the presentation today would like to join us, Alex is going to pop the link for the forum in the chat, so we can. So you're very welcome to join us. I think This is our first event this academic year, and it's really given us some great food for thought. So thank you so much for that.
My pleasure.